Hi, beautiful people of the internet. I gotta say, one of my favorite parts is sitting down in this chair and getting to talk to you guys, because even though you can't talk back to me, you do eventually talk back to me in the comments. And it's like, I'm not even exaggerating. I'm not being funny. It's the highlight of my week. Get cozy, put on your seatbelt, put on your cleaning gloves, grab a snack, whatever you do it now. Let's get into it. Here's the thing. He's a sick, deranged man, sick human being. And guys, I'm tired of talking about him as well. P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, Sean, Puffy, whatever. Also, by the way, did you know that he got the nickname Puff as a child? Because when he was a child, when he was angry, he would huff and puff. How interesting is that? I mean, he looks like the kind of guy that would huff and puff when he's angry. But we're no stranger to him. We've talked about him before on TikTok, but before we talked about what he was charged with in 2024, what we were expecting from his trial. Whereas now we're going to focus on the lore, because awful man, but this is the part of true crime that is interesting to me, the psychology. And it's like, what went wrong in your childhood, or what made you the person that you are today, where you are capable of doing such horrific things. So today we're going to kind of backtrack. We're going to go through the lore from A to Z up until his charges, and we'll eventually touch that on the end as well. He has not been handed a sentence yet at the time that I'm recording this video. When that's going to happen, I guess we'll have to see. I believe his hearing is scheduled for his sentencing hearing for October, but I also think that his team is trying to make it faster. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Anyway, in court, at that courthouse and before, Sean Combs's dirty laundry was air, point blank, period. And there's so much lore that he carries. Sean Combs was born in Harlem, New York, and his father was actually murdered when he was only 33 years old. Sean Combs was raised by his mother, Janice Combs. He went to an all-boys Catholic school, graduated in 1987, and then he moved on to Howard University. He would eventually drop out only after his second year, but the way that he carried himself at uni kind of was relatively the same as to how he carried himself as an adult. His entire life, he always had a big personality, a big persona that you could just feel when he walked in the room. He was always one of the louder ones in the room, outgoing, fun, liked to party, you know the guy. Uptown Records, it's an American record label where Sean Combs found an internship in 1990, so he would have been around 21 years old back then. The record label is based in New York City, and it was known for R&B, hip-hop kind of music in the 80s and the 90s. And it was there where Sean Combs really started his musical career. Only a year into his internship, he got promoted. He got promoted to working as a talent director for Uptown, but still, even back then, he was more so a producer rather than a musician himself. His time at Uptown Records came to an end when he was fired, and if you ask pretty much anyone that worked with him back then, anyone that ran into him, crossed paths with him, they definitely would not have nice things to say about him. I think it's obvious that working with him is not a pleasant thing. And I think it was in an interview, his mentor that was with him at that time would say that he fired him because he saw how much potential he had. And he, I guess, wanted him to go out on his own and try doing his own thing. I think there's a backstory to that. I definitely think that Sean pissed someone off and that's why he was fired. But if you ask Sean Combs, he would say that he was fired because, quote, two kings couldn't live in one castle, end quote. Guys, I think it's obvious, but this man was born with an ego larger than life for no reason. 3 years go by, and now it's towards the end of 1993. Sean is around 24 years old, and he starts his own record label, Bad Boy Entertainment. And to say that it was successful doesn't even put it into perspective, because less than 5 years later, the label would have already sold nearly $100 million worth of records. Eventually, it went on to win multiple Grammy Awards. It sold over 500 million records and produced over 38 platinum albums. At the center of the entire thing, attached right to it, was Sean Combs. He signed huge artists like the Notorious B.I.G., otherwise known as Biggie. He signed Usher, Mary J. Blige. The record label was dominating the charts, and it grew to be so big, not only because of how much potential the actual record label had, but how much potential the artists that were signed to it had. Every single artist, every single musician, every single person that Sean Combs signed to the label was intentional. It was strategic. He did it on purpose. There was no end goal for what Sean Combs envisioned for himself and for Bad Boy Entertainment. He didn't only want to climb the record label all the way to the top. He didn't only want it to be the best of the best. But Sean Combs wanted to build an empire. He had all these dreams of hitting the industry from each and every different angle. And he was so good at selling this dream of, look, I have big hopes and dreams. And not only that, but I also have the talent and the skills that I need to make all my dreams come to life. I'm going to succeed at it. I'm going to dominate the music and entertainment industry. And if you want to be a part of it, you need to come join. You need to hop on the train before it leaves you. Meanwhile, at the same time, there's also a growing tension within California because while Bad Boy Entertainment was becoming rapidly successful on the East Coast, Death Row Records was growing at a similar speed with rappers such as Snoop Dogg and Tupac on the West Coast, thus inevitably making the West Coast rappers and the East Coast rappers enemies. Suge Knight was the CEO of Death Row Records. Their biggest talent was Tupac. He was one of the greatest, most influential rappers of all time. Tupac to Death Row Records was the equivalent of the Notorious B.I.G., aka Biggie, to Bad Boy Entertainment. Anyway, all that to make the very relevant point that Sean Combs had successfully made a name for himself. He was surrounded, his circle of close friends, people that he hung around with were all A-list celebrities. He became known for his grand, lavish parties that everyone heard about. Everyone and their mother wanted to attend these parties. I think at one point he even called himself or referred to himself as the Great Gatsby. So that was probably like those kind of parties that you see in the movie. It's probably not far off from the kind of parties that Sean Combs wanted to have. Obviously, completely different scales when we realize what Sean Combs was actually doing at these parties and what his intentions were. But regardless, he had the friends, he had the name, he had the reputation, and he had all the money in the world to do anything that he wanted to do. But throughout his climb to success, it felt like there was just a dark cloud looming over him. That dark cloud kind of exploded throughout the last few years, but his history of allegations, accusations, and conspiracies, it stems back all the way to the 90s, specifically to one infamous night in 1991, where 9 people died at a basketball game that he organized on a college campus. It was December 28th of 1991. Sean Combs was working at New York's Uptown Records, but this was before Bad Boy Entertainment came to be, so he was around 22 years old. Sean Combs and Uptown Records artist Heavy D were promoting a celebrity basketball game. And it was Sean Combs' idea. He was the one who approached the school, he pitched the idea, he got it approved, he booked the school's gym and told the city college that he would take care of all the behind the scenes stuff, that including security. And then he went into absolute overdrive trying to promote this basketball game. 1,400 tickets in advance were sold. At the very least, 500 tickets were sold at the door the day of the event, and at least 100 were handed out free for Sean's family and friends. That is already a lot of people. The day of the event, so many people were trying to sneak in without tickets. And keep in mind, the gym was not a big venue to begin with. The actual event started at 6 p.m., but by 4 p.m., there were already so many people lining up outside the door, between 1,500 to 2,000 people. And once the doors were opened, it was complete and utter chaos from the beginning. It sounds like a recipe for disaster, but when doors opened, over 3,000 people rushed down the stairs, this specific stairwell. They thought that through the doors they would get to the gym. And all these kids had been looking forward to this basketball game. They were so excited. Morale was high. And when they heard that big name celebrities like Mike Tyson had shown up at the VIP entrance, things only got more hectic. It got more chaotic. People got crazier. And the crowd only got tighter and tighter as they pretty much fought to get inside that gym. The stairwell was packed in full. People were pushing up against each other. And honestly, describing this event reminds me so much of Astroworld. Like, I think I've said some of these exact same sentences when I covered Astroworld over on my TikTok account. And I'm sure if you've been to a concert, a music festival, or a big event like this, you can picture it in your head when the doors open, especially when there's not that much security or it's not well organized and people literally do start rushing in. And it could be 10 people, it could be 100. The force that it makes you feel when it's multiple people at once pushing towards the same direction, it feels impossible to get out of that situation. In the stairwell, people were trampling over each other, and at one point it was so out of control that the people who were hired to be there for security, even they thought, this is too much for us, we can't handle it. Or Either they couldn't handle it or they didn't want to handle it or both, but they grabbed the cash box from the ticket sales and with the head of security, they left the hectic scene by the stairs in the lobby. They snuck into the gym and closed the doors behind them on purpose. They wanted to block out the kids that were trying to fight and get into the gym. I say kids, but I mean high school, college aged kids. Someone in the crowd that was there on the stairwell said that people were not behaving like people. They were behaving more like animals. Inside the actual gym, that was also not a peaceful scene, but it wasn't nearly as hectic as outside. But the head of security pulled out his weapon. I presume he was threatening people to behave in a really, really horrible attempt to try and gain control of the situation. And then he proceeded to move a table up against the doors that led to the stairwell to intentionally block it. He stood on top of the table only to make it heavier and used the table and his body weight as a barricade as the kids on the other side pushed and pounded. The crowd was only getting tighter and tighter by the second. And guys, I'm telling you this, I'm trying to describe it in the best way possible so you can get an idea of how it really was. But this all happened so fast. Everything that I'm saying happened within 15 minutes. They were packed in with so much force that one of the girls who was in the crowd said that her feet left the ground and they never touched the ground again because there were so many people pushing up against her with such force. It was getting hard to breathe. People started passing out and others continued to push on the doors, but now they weren't yelling to get in the gym. Now they were yelling for help. They were screaming out that they couldn't breathe. They were shouting, begging for oxygen and ambulances. When Officer Sean Harris, a 10-year NYPD veteran, was made aware of the situation, he tried as best as he could to make his way through the crowd to help them out, but he physically could not. There was not even a gap for his finger to go through. He was towards the top of the stairs when he lost his balance and he fell on top of this massive crowd. The people in the stairwell still stuck together wall to wall. They managed to grab his body, lift the police officer over their heads, and kept passing him down through the crowd until he eventually made it down. He fell onto the table that had been placed there to block the door. And the first thing that he saw when he fell and he could see inside the gym was Sean Combs. He was standing there without a care in the world with women besides him all holding cash in their hands. Within 15 minutes, those 15 minutes, 9 people died. All were high school or college students. They were crushed to death at the bottom of the staircase, while 29 others were injured. Their cause of death was ruled as asphyxia due to compression of the chest. What a morbid way to die, standing there unable to breathe, begging for oxygen until you just completely lose it and then you're gone. And also, not only horrible because how aggressive it is, but because it could have been 1000% prevented. The very next day, the mayor called for an emergency meeting. In that meeting were representatives from the college, EMS, the medical examiner, police, fire, and the city. And ultimately, it was ruled that the college was 50% responsible, but the other 50% fell on Sean Combs and Heavy D. However, no criminal charges were filed. After that terrific and traumatizing crowd crush, Sean Combs' reputation took a hit. I think there was even people in the industry that saw how awful it was, and his behavior afterwards wasn't necessarily grand in some people's eyes. And people were thinking, this guy's done. His career is done. He's never going to make it. But they were wrong. Sean Combs kind of played victim a little bit. He did try and take accountability, but not really. He claimed that he was the one that was lucky to escape before it got to that point, and he said that the guilt was consuming him. Even at one point, he said that he thought he was going clinically insane because of how guilty he felt. However, if you ask the victims' families, most of them, if not all of them, think that Sean Combs never owned up to the part that he played that night. He never took accountability. He never apologized, and some claim that it did feel like Sean was playing victim and that he was completely unaware or just, again, didn't care about all the different families that were affected, all the different people, not only the families who tragically lost their loved one, but also every single other person in that stairwell that I'm sure you would experience so much trauma from seeing a person die next to you and you not being able to do anything to help it. A few years after that, Sean Combs continued to become a larger-than-life figure in the industry, and those families were left with a massive void in their heart that they would never be able to fix. A few years after that, Sean Combs got a new roommate, 14-year-old Usher, who had just been signed with a record label. He was sent to live with then 25-year-old Sean Combs. They lived together for around a year or so. Pretty weird, right? Because of the age difference, but it was actually Usher's record label. It was their idea to send him to New York City for quote unquote artist development, thinking that he could learn a lot from Sean Combs and he could learn about the industry and kind of get to live in the lifestyle for a little bit to see everything that it came with. And Sean Combs did have that reputation. He would take these artists who had so much potential and he would kind of help them blow up, if you will. He would guide them on their look, their music, their public image. However, it was borderline concerning because if you didn't know what kind of person Sean Combs was, you would be like, oh, yeah, I mean, great mentor. If you want to reach that level of success, he's obviously knowledgeable in the industry. You could probably learn a lot from him. But it was the way that he became so involved, especially with young artists who had no experience and who really had no guidance other than him, because it was almost like it was manipulative and he would use it as a control mechanism. It was kind of like, yeah, I'll help you get to where you want to be, but at what expense? Because if I help you, I assume, right? I wasn't one of the artists, but I assume that he would make you feel like, well, I gave you this. I was able to make you known. I blew you up and now you kind of owe me. And call it speculation, but I think it's pretty safe to say that this was only about Sean Combs getting more control, more say, and more power. Usher has since then spoken about living with Sean Combs and what it was like, and although he said very little, he says nothing but everything at the same time. He did touch briefly on in an interview saying that he was exposed to a lot of adult situations at way too young of an age, describing it as both exciting and, quote, very curious. And although he hasn't ever said anything specifically against Sean Combs, the way that he talks about it, if you look in his eyes, you guys should look up the interviews, it kind of feels like, I don't know, it seems like even he knew that he was way too young to be in the situations that he was put in and to be exposed to everything that he was seeing. In 2016, in an interview with Howard Stern's, Usher described the lifestyle to be, quote, pretty wild. And a lot of those things, I imagine, that he experienced and witnessed were during those infamous parties. Sean Combs' parties were always present in his life. In college, he was known as the party kid, and he threw a good amount of parties back then, which is why I said that he kind of carried his persona in college and just kind of intensified it by a billion as he grew up. So his parties turned from not only being college students, but now also celebrities, athletes, musicians, etc. And if you're familiar with his parties at all, you don't even have to know the details of what happened at the parties, but if you've heard anyone talk about them, people talk about how after midnight, the parties just turned absolutely excessive, crazy, and wild. And now, knowing in hindsight everything about the freak-offs and everything that Sean Combs is into and all this stuff, it gives me chills to think of what was happening inside those parties and what kind of people were there doing whatever. And to think that a 14-year-old kid, guys, 14 years old, what is that? Freshman in high school? Maybe even 8th grader, a 14-year-old kid was just there, likely encouraged to mingle and participate in whatever was happening. And it's quite frankly pretty terrifying. And Usher being 14 years old really makes me think about Justin Bieber and the weird relationship that Sean Combs had with Justin Bieber. This was way later, years later, but Justin Bieber was also only 15 years old when his rise to fame happened. And Sean Combs made it a point to befriend him. And whatever happened between Justin Bieber and Sean Combs, if anything, is still unknown. But there are more than one videos of them too that are they just feel dark when it comes to the way that Sean spoke to Justin Bieber. There was one that stood out to me, and it's Sean Combs and Justin Bieber. They're talking about whatever, and Sean says that Justin is getting ready to have a 48-hour sleepover with him. But he mentions that he couldn't talk about what they were going to do. And Justin's face is like, what's going on here? Sean Combs said he couldn't say any details about what he was going to do, but said that Justin was about to have the time of his life. 15 years old. 15. And again, I think it's very likely that, like Usher, Sean Combs exposed 15-year-old Justin Bieber to really disturbing things as well. Usher moved in with Sean Combs the year after Sean had started Bad Boy Entertainment. However, the year before that was when Sean Combs discovered a young Christopher Wallace in Brooklyn, New York. Christopher Wallace, aka the Notorious B.I.G., aka Biggie, when he met Sean Combs, he was in a pretty dark spot in his life. He had always been passionate about music, but when he met Sean, he was in and out of jail, still trying to make music. As soon as Sean heard his music, he was impressed with his talent and signed him almost immediately. And the two of them, they kind of birthed Bad Boy together, if you will, because Bad Boy Records was founded with Biggie as the main act. So Biggie kind of became the face of the East Coast rappers. And within a singular year of his album coming out, everyone knew who Biggie was. Everyone knew his name. He was winning awards left and right. He was getting amazing opportunities to work with the biggest names in the industry. Everyone knew Biggie, and everyone saw Sean Combs as the person who helped get him where he was, as his manager slash producer slash best friend. But then there was trouble in paradise. There was talk. Actually, not talk. There were more like whispers about Biggie considering the idea of leaving Bad Boy Records. Allegedly, reason being because in the contract that he had with Bad Boy Records, there were issues in regards to his publishing rights, in regards to Biggie having the rights to his own music. So it's been said that he was planning on leaving because the legal fight to get his rights back to his own music was becoming too difficult. And it seemed really hard for no reason, and he was over it. And then Biggie was killed at only 24 years old in March of 1997, just after midnight. He was on his way to a party that Sean Combs told him to attend. Sean Combs was also on his way to the party, but he was in a separate vehicle. They were driving in separate cars with separate groups of people, but they were driving pretty close to each other. And allegedly, Sean's former bodyguard said that he was planning on being in the car where Biggie was. He wanted to be with Biggie because remember, during this time, he had already blown up. He was one of the biggest artists at the time, and he needed the extra security. The bodyguard told Sean Combs that he thought it was best that he stayed with Biggie, but Sean Combs told him not to go with Biggie. He told him to drive in the car with himself, the car that Sean was riding in. And at the end of the day, the bodyguard was hired by Sean Combs for Sean Combs. So he ends up driving with Sean Combs. And oddly enough, later on, he makes it a point to say that in the car that they were in when he was with Sean Combs, things were weird, specifically because Sean Combs had his seat was pushed all the way back. He was sitting very low, almost as if he was hiding from the window, allegedly, but he remembers thinking that was very odd. So they're in separate cars, they're driving, it's nighttime, they stop at a stoplight, and suddenly shots are being fired. Biggie Smalls is shot 4 times. The scene is absolute chaos. Everyone is jumping out of their cars to see what's going on, to see what happened, to see who's hurt. Biggie is rushed to the hospital, but despite their best efforts, he's pronounced dead at 24 years old. Only 6 months before that night, 6 months before Biggie was killed, Tupac was killed. In the exact same way, in a drive-by shooting, he was stopped at a red light, 14 shots were fired at the car, Tupac was hit with 4 of them, and he passed away in September of 1996 at only 25 years old. After the accident, the night of, he was sent to the hospital, and he died at the hospital 6 days later. Both murders to this day remain officially unsolved. And there are so many conspiracies and different theories about their deaths, but both seem to be deeply tied to the East Coast versus West Coast rap feud of the 1990s. Again, so many different who and what happened and who did what. So many different beliefs as to who played what part in both situations, but a really big conspiracy theory is that the East Coast rappers killed Tupac, likely because he was rising at he was gaining a lot of attention, becoming a really, really big name in the industry at the peak of his career, and maybe someone from the East Coast didn't like that because they were either jealous, they saw him as competition, or they just didn't want to see them be successful, so they had Tupac killed, and as a revenge, the West Coast rappers took out Biggie. In the same breath, though, a lot of people believe that Sean Combs had Tupac killed and Biggie killed. Tupac's family believed that Sean Combs had something to do with his death. Biggie, on the other hand, as we know, he was considering leaving his label, and Biggie didn't need Sean Combs. He didn't need Bad Boy, not anymore. But on the other hand, Sean Combs needed Biggie, and losing him, no way. That was not going to be an option for him. So instead of letting him walk away, or instead of letting it even get to that point, he took him out of the picture completely. He killed Biggie to get him out of the way, to keep control, and to continue to be able to bring in money from the rights that he had from his music, allegedly. And Sean Combs was behaving weirdly, for a lack of a better word, after Biggie's passing. It's been said that he took Biggie's death, he took it, ran with it, and used it as a way to gain sympathy, to capitalize on how shocked everyone was and how devastated people were, and to use it for his advantage. Bad Boy Records was approached shortly after Biggie's passing by Rolling Stone, the magazine. And again, this wasn't long after Biggie passed, so his team thought, this is great. We could use the cover to pay some sort of tribute to Biggie. But Sean Combs was like, no, I have a better idea. Biggie, he's gone. It doesn't matter anyway. So how about I will just be on the cover instead, and I will use it to promote my new album. And that's exactly what he did. He released his debut album, No Way Out, in July of 1997, with the song I'll Be Missing You as a tribute to Biggie. A couple years later, in 1999, Sean Combs found himself in serious legal trouble yet again. This time, it was when he was dating Jennifer Lopez. And don't get confused, because during this time, he was in an on and off relationship with model and actress Kim Porter, which was the mother of some of his children. He was dating her from 1994 to 2007, on and off. But in the middle of that, Sean Combs was also in a relationship with J-Lo. Their relationship lasted from 1999 to around 2001. And in 1999, Sean Combs and J-Lo were involved in an incident at a nightclub where a weapon went off and a woman was badly injured in New York City. Sean Combs and J-Lo were both arrested. J-Lo was not charged with anything. Sean Combs was. He faced trial but then was acquitted of all charges. The woman, however, that was at the nightclub that was severely injured claims to this day that Sean Combs was the one responsible, allegedly, and she still believes it. She still believes it wholeheartedly. She sued Sean Combs and they settled for $130 million. Worth it to note as well that there was another witness that came forward, and he said that he had a clear, he was one of the ones that was also injured. He said that he had a clear point of view to Sean Combs and that he was the person who pulled out the weapon. Although, of course, if you ask Sean, he would say that he wasn't even carrying a weapon on him that night. When it all went down at the nightclub as well, it wasn't only Sean and J-Lo. It was also Sean's bodyguard was there, as well as a 20-year-old rapper, Jamal Barrow, who went by the name of Shine. Shine was young when he was quote-unquote discovered by Sean Combs, but as soon, again, like this is like a pattern. As soon as he heard his music, he saw the potential, he signed him to his label for a 5-record deal. And he was at the nightclub as well, the night of the incident. And for whatever reason, afterwards, Sean Combs hired a different lawyer for himself and his bodyguard than he did for Shine. Sean Combs walked away free. Shine, on the other hand, he was sentenced to 10 years. He served 9. And he completely felt as if Sean Combs threw him under the bus because he didn't want to get in trouble. But if someone was going to, it was not going to be him. It was going to be Shine. Shine, to this day, says that Sean Combs ruined his life. And he's one of many people who believes that Sean Combs only ever saw the artists that he signed to his label as moneymaker machines. He didn't care about them. He did not care about them one bit. He only ever really cared about 2 things, money and power. And he would go to far lengths to make sure that he had both of those things. If there was something that Sean Combs knew how to do, it was to grab people's attention. Sure, he made music. Sure, he came out with his own albums. But think about it for a second. Obviously it's different now because of the trial and everything that has happened. But for a good amount of people, when they thought about Sean Combs prior to 2024, they didn't think of him as this great artist who made great music. Maybe some people did, but up on that conversation, high on that conversation as well, were his parties, the other A-list celebrities that he was friends with, the public appearances that he had. It was more so about the reputation that he made for himself rather than, oh my God, he came out with this song and it was so amazing and so cool. Don't get me wrong, people obviously still liked his music and that was part of his fame, but what he did on purpose. His whole thing had always been to build an empire, to get as much power as he could, make as many connections as he could, so that if things ever went south, he would be protected. He would have more than one thing to kind of fall back on if he needed to. He didn't necessarily rely on his own music, but he definitely relied on his reputation. And the easiest way for him to make money was to keep signing artists and sucking them into this weird lifestyle in order to keep control of them, to keep the money coming. Sean Diddy Combs became known for his legendary white parties in the late 1990s and in the early 2000s. His parties, we briefly spoke about them, but they were lavish, they were grand, they were excessive, chaotic. The guest list had people such as Beyonce, Jay-Z, Usher, Kim Kardashian, Mariah Carey, Paris Hilton, Tom Cruise. Sean hired women to stand around topless with angel wings on. He had women dressing as mermaids swimming in the pool, synchronized swimmers, custom dance floors, acrobats, dancers, everything that you could think of that is over the top and excessive, he had. There were also drugs absolutely everywhere. They were being passed around like candy on silver platters, always available for anyone that wanted them. There were a lot of hookups, a lot of group hookups, if you know what I mean, naked people everywhere. And those parties became so iconic that they were referenced in music, fashion, and TV culture as pretty much the peak of celebrity exclusivity and branding in the early 2000s. And you hear about this and you think, yeah, immediately off the top of your head, you're like, that is expensive. A Hollywood reporter alleged the white party started to cost $1 million per party by the mid-2000s. So this is the kind of reputation that he had, the reputation that followed him everywhere. I just want to emphasize how much wealth this man had at the tip of his fingers, but he had it all. And within that, he had a lot of eyes on him, watching the way that he moved, watching what he did, and watching when things started to get a little bit too uncomfortable. Questions were being raised by more and more people, and things that maybe were just whispers before were now full-on conversations. His weird behavior with Usher, his weird behavior with Justin Bieber, amongst other people. I don't even have time to name all the people that he had weird encounters with. The accusations, the suspicions surrounding him, people dying around him, the fact that no one really knew what was going on at those parties. Girls at his parties were seen absolutely trashed and unconscious sometimes after only having one drink. It was overall a sense of, what is this guy really doing? Like, it just started to feel like he was just famous for being famous, and all he cared about was getting bigger and getting richer and being well known. Not to make light of the situation, this is a horrific story, but have you seen the meme that is like, his greed disgusts me? That's how I feel about Sean Combs anyway. It was in 2006 when Sean Combs heard singer Cassandra Ventura's first single, fell in love with it, and like he had done to many others, he signed her to his record label. At the time, she was only 19 years old. He was 38. Sean and Cassie's relationship lasted through 2018, and it was in November 16th of 2023 when all suspicions of Sean Combs' behavior, his intentions, and his agenda were confirmed by the people that didn't already know, and his house of cards pretty much came crashing down. In November of 2023, Cassandra Ventura filed a 35-page civil lawsuit against Sean Combs. In said lawsuit, she alleged a lot of things, but mainly that he abused her physically and emotionally during their relationship, that he held control over her because of her career, because she was signed to his record label, that he would force her, amongst other things, to take pills, do drugs until she was almost unconscious and more intoxicated than she had ever been, and then he would have sex with her, and he would force her to have encounters with other men. She alleged that he had something to do in blowing up Kid Cudi's car, that he tried to kill the former CEO of Death Row Records, and after a few months passed, Homeland Security agents show up, search warrants in hands at his residences in both Miami and LA. They raid his houses and leave with a massive amount of physical evidence. They arrest him. He gets charged with racketeering, conspiracy, and transportation to engage in prostitution. His trial began May 5th of 2025 with jury selection in the U.S. District Court, Southern District of New York. The verdict was just reached on July 2nd of 2025. The jury acquitted him of racketeering and charges. However, they did find him guilty on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. He is still in custody awaiting his sentencing. And guys, I was shocked when I learned that he was found not guilty for RICO. I don't know why I was shocked, don't ask me, because I have no knowledge of anything legal, but I looked into it more. Specifically, I saw this one interview of a legal expert explain the situation, and it made a lot more sense to me. So I'm going to try to explain it in the best of my abilities. If you were confused, if not, then feel free to skip this part, I guess. So based on what I heard this legal expert say, it was his opinion that the facts of the case against Sean Combs were, since the beginning, very difficult to tie it to the facts for a RICO case. Not saying, please do not misunderstand this, I'm absolutely not saying that what he did was right, that he didn't commit crimes, and that he's not a horrible person, because he is. He's terrible. The things that he did are inhumane and they're disgusting. But RICO, I guess, a lot of people refer to racketeering as RICO. RICO stands for Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organization. So traditionally, this targets organized crime rather than music industry enterprises, if that makes sense. So he says, yeah, Sean Combs may have had people cover up for his crimes, people that worked for him, and his businesses may have had a part to play in that, but RICO was designed to combat mafia-style criminal enterprises that use legitimate businesses as fronts with intentions to conduct illegal activity. So applying it to Bad Boy Records doesn't quite fit, because Bad Boy Records is a legitimate music business. And that became a problem because the defense successfully argued that the company's core was lawful, that the company was built for the music and entertainment industry. It wasn't built to cover up crimes. The defense, unfortunately, did a good job at stating that, and in turn went against the government's claim of a criminal enterprise. And that same concept comes into play when it comes to the question, are they going to try and take his assets? Is anything going to happen there? Because for the government to seize Sean Combs' assets, they must be proven to be directly connected to criminal activity. And since his money and his wealth was primarily accumulated through his legitimate businesses and ventures and not from the crimes that he was convicted of, like, he made money from actually making music and putting albums out. He didn't make money from the crimes. Like, he didn't make any money from the freak offs or whatever. I think I'm making this more confusing. In other words, the crimes that he committed did not involve financial gain. So because of that, it might be difficult to take his assets. So what's next? I guess we'll see. His sentencing hearing is set for October, but even though he was found not guilty of most of the serious crimes, he is still in trouble. He's going to be back in court to be sentenced, and I think he's being sued by a lot of people, so we'll see what happens. Anyway, that is all I have for today's video. Let me know what your thoughts are on this. Thank you guys so much for sticking through it. If you stuck around all the way through the end, I love you so much. I hope you're having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of I Wish You Were Here. As a reminder, you can listen to this podcast anywhere you get your podcast. Video version also available on YouTube. Love you guys.